What's going on, YouTube Nation? I'm the Coffee Bean GM, and today we're going to be doing a little thing here. It's kind of popular on the One Shop group with an idea of, no excuses, just play the game. And today I'm going to be talking about Shadow of the Demon Lord. Now, if you're into horror, you're into fantasy, maybe a little bit of steampunk and clockworks, then this is definitely a game you'd want to check out. Produced by Robert J. Schwalb. He's had his hand in quite a few other projects. If you haven't heard his name, then just do a quick Google and it'll bring him up. He's a pretty good creator. Has some really good stuff. This game came out on Kickstarter about a year ago. I decided to go ahead and back it. I'm a big fan of the horror genre, and I just wanted something a little bit different. I've been playing. I was doing Dungeon World for a while. I was doing the D&D 5th edition for a bit. Just looking to kind of amp things up and do something a little bit new, a little bit different for a change. So I saw this on Kickstarter, and I was like, hell yeah, let's try it out. So I've been playing this now for the past couple of months, and, I couldn't be happier. It's a great system, easy to play, has some in-depth tactics if you really want to get into it. It helps push the horror feeling of the game with the rules. I mean, the rules complement the setting very well. So I'll just give you an overview of what the game is, kind of what you should expect out of it if you do want to play it or check into it. And I'm actually going to do a video probably in the next couple of days or so about character creation and, go into a little bit more depth of how to play the game. But this is just going to be a basic overview. So, as I said, it's horror. I'd probably put it into the high fantasy sort of category because there's dwarves and there's elves and fae, there's magics, there's deities. It feels very fantasy, but at the same time, it is very dark and grim. Almost pulling from like a Call of Cthulhu sort of game. It doesn't really, it can, I guess, fall into the more gothic horror like Ravenloft, if you wanted to run it in that direction. I haven't messed with it too much, with that kind of idea yet. I've been just sticking to the basics. So, you got your characters are pretty standard, your races. You got humans, you got dwarves, there's changelings, which generally look like something else. There's clockworks, which we'll get into that in just a second. There's goblins. You can be a goblin. You can be an orc. There's all different paths that you can take. Well, the races themselves are called ancestries. That's your ancestry. And once you pick your ancestry, you can move on and you choose a path, which could be your warrior or a mage or a rogue. And then as you develop your character further and further along, you get to access into more and more different paths. And you can start splitting out, and there's some crazy combos you can come up with. But, that covers the basics of the races. Every race has a ton of tables, like, here's the orcs. I'll bring this up. You can see lots of tables. And it's actually a really great idea, because the whole idea of the setting is the chaos, the shadow of the demon lord is this great big entity sort of thing that's causing this world to go into chaos. And all these tables, when you roll up a character, you don't have to roll on these tables. You can cherry pick it if you want. But as a DM, I really encourage my players to roll on these tables because it kind of gives you that feeling, that chaotic feeling that you don't know what you're going to end up with, or what you end up with you have to somehow make sense out of. And it really gets your gears turning, your creativity's burning. And I've seen some crazy character concepts come up and people just play the hell out of them, and it's an absolute blast. On the other end of the spectrum, I've seen players that roll up a character and they just have absolutely no fucking clue what to do with it, because it's just, I don't want to say it's out there, but they just falls out of their comfort zone and they don't know how to handle the character or what to do, and they have a very difficult time falling into character. And when they do that, then just have them roll up a new character and go from there. If they really have a difficult time with the randomness of it, let them cherry pick it, work with them as the DM, and things will come out great. Once you do your basic character, you can get interesting things, which is basically your 5e trinkets for those of you interested with 5e. There's personality traits you can get in there. Basic attributes, there's strength, agility, intellect, and will. That's it. And then you have your hit points, you have defense, you have a perception Modifier. You can gain Insanity and Corruption, which I'll go into those in a few minutes. All you need for this system is a die 20 and a handful of die 6s. It doesn't use any other dice. The mechanics, again, I'll talk about in just a minute. But let's start with your basic paths. The game is built on the idea of choosing a path or a class, for as it's commonly called. But once you choose this path, you can kind of go down this path, and then it breaks off into other paths, and those paths break into more paths. So it does have rules for level 0 for some of you that are fans with like Dungeon Crawl Classics and the Gauntlets and running multiple characters to see who makes it out alive. But as personally, I like to just start them with level 1 and go from there. But there's your Magician, there's a Priest, a Rogue, and a Warrior. And that's all you start with, which might it might make people feel a little cheated, I suppose, but it really shouldn't, because there's a lot of your character, when you're building your character, your ancestor, there's so many different tables and stuff, and chaotic elements that goes into it that the players really don't feel the same. They might have the same abilities for the class and same idea for your basic path, but the characters themselves come across very different. But once you have those, you only have those 4. So if you become a Magician, you're in through level 3. At level 3, you get access into expert paths, and this includes things like, if you were a Priest, you might go into something like a Cleric, a Druid, an Oracle, or a Paladin. If you followed a path of the Power, which is your Magician, you might fall into the next path of an Artificer, a Sorcerer, Witch, or Wizard. Now, just because you started out as a Magician doesn't mean you need to become a Wizard. If you start as a Magician and through the game you find that you end up in a lot more hand-to-hand combat and something, you might fall into the path of war and become a fighter. Or you might feel that maybe whatever spells you have complement your sneaking around and thieving, so you might become the path of trickery, and you might become a scout or a thief or an assassin. You don't have to stick to what you are to begin with. And you follow those up through level, let's see, 3, 4, 5, 6, I think it is. Yep, level 6. And then at level 7, you're going to have access to your Master Path. And these are just few levels. They're smaller classes, but they run the gamut of all sorts of things. There's the passive magic, skill, or magic and then passive skill. But this could be something from Arcanist to a Bard to a Magus to a Mage Knight, a Transmuter, a Diplomat, a Brute, Avenger, a Sentinel, Poisoner, Weapon Master, Zealot, an Exorcist, a Gunslinger, Infiltrator, an Apocalyptist, a Myrmidon, Sentinels, all sorts of different options. And so you can then start off with a character who's a mage, who then kind of falls in and becomes a thief, and then down the line he becomes a gladiator or a gladiator. I mean, it all depends on what you want to do and what you want to create. And it may seem really off the wall at first, but as the game develops and as your character develops, you can see where it's almost like multi-classing in other systems. And that's exactly what it is. And all of these different things have really cool abilities. That's another time for when I get into like a character creation video. So like I said, you only use a die 20 and a handful of die 6s. Okay. When you go to do something, everything has a difficulty of 10. So, like, say you're trying to climb up the side of a slippery wall. It's going to be a difficulty of 10. So you're going to roll 1 die 20, add your strength modifier or whatever the DM feels is applicable for the situation, and you would add whatever the modifier is. So say you have a +2 to your modifier for your strength, you would roll 1 die 20 +2. If you beat 10 or higher, you succeed. Now, that might seem a little awkward because beating a 10 or higher on a 1 die 20 plus your modifier is very easy. So in order to balance that out, there's things called banes and there's things called boons. A bane is a negative that is applied to your roll, and a boon is a positive that's applied to your roll. Now, say you're trying to climb up the side of a wall and it has plenty of handholds and stuff. The DM might say, give me a climbing check and apply maybe one bane or one boon because it has handholds. That means you roll 1 die 20 plus your modifier plus a 1 die 6. All that together, if you beat 10 or higher, then it's a success. On the opposite end, maybe it's very slippery. So the DM will say, okay, give me a climb check with 2 banes. This is going to be your 1 die 20 plus your modifier minus whatever you roll on your 2 die 6s, the higher of the 2 numbers. So if you roll a 12 on your 1 die 20 plus your modifier, you're going to have 2 die 6s are your banes. You're going to roll those, and whatever the higher the 2 numbers is, say you get a 2 and a 6, that 6 is the higher number, that's the negative that is applied to your roll. So you end up with only a 6 in the end, and that's a failure. The more banes you apply to the roll, the more chance that they're going to roll high or a 6, and so the more difficult it becomes. And now at some point it kind of averages out. I mean, anything more than like 4, maybe 5 banes is a little overkill because they're almost guaranteed at that point to roll a 6. But, you know, if you really want to guarantee that they're going to roll a 6, give them 10 banes on something. Not that I say you should, but, you know. And that's it for skills. I mean, you don't have to do anything else with it. Now, when you're fighting in combat and you attack a creature or your enemy, per se, the difficulty modifier, the number that you're trying to reach, is whatever their defense is. So if your monster has a defense of 14, they're going to make their attacks with a 1 die 20 plus their modifier, try and hit a 14 or higher. Now, and again, you can apply boons and banes to the situation depending on what abilities the character has. Some classes or some paths give you those abilities. Some races give you those abilities. You know, maybe you have a perfect line of sight, or maybe the creature has cover, in which case you're going to have banes to your roll because it's much difficult to hit them. And, you know, that sums up the system. That's really all you do for the most part. The GM will apply your banes and boons to the situations, and you roll. Damage is always a 1 die 6 plus different modifiers or multiple die 6s. So like a great sword is like 2 or 3 die 6 damage compared to a dagger that might be 1 die 6. And they add extra reach and different attributes and stuff like that. Let's see, that's the basic of the game. I mean, really anything beyond that, you'll kind of learn as you play. But if you can understand that aspect of it, then you're ready to play the game. So, like I said, it's a horror fantasy game, and this game gives you a lot of tools as the DM to implement that horror. And I'm actually going to do another video based on horror and how to apply that into a game, because it's something that is very, very difficult. It's very hard when you're doing it at home around your tabletop, and 10 times harder when you're trying to play it online, you know, over Google Hangouts or Skype or Roll20. You know, when you're at home, you can kind of give the atmosphere of horror. Online, it's much more difficult. But the game does help out quite a bit. There's some ideas in here like corruption, so the characters get twisted and corrupted by the evil that they might do, or the shadow of this demon lord as it passes over them. There's deprivation rules, disease, exposure to harsh elements. Insanity is another one. I like to call corruption the don't be a dick rule. It's almost like if your player or if your character wants to be a complete asshole and do stuff, you know, whether it's pissing off the other players or just being a dick to the town, then they're going to gain corruption. And the more corruption that you gain, the worse off your character is. They start mutating, limbs will fall off, they become sick, people don't associate with them, or they keep them a large distance. If you die, there's a very high chance that there's no way you're coming back. Normally you would have a chance to roll some dice and see if you are able to, you know, stabilize yourself or something. You know, the more corruption you have, then you're fucked. So if you want to be a total asshole in the game and piss people off, then your character's probably not going to last very long. The more corruption you get, the worse things are, and it just goes downhill from there. And once you get corruption, it's extremely difficult to get rid of. There's some rules in there, but basically you have to feed yourself and these corruption points that you have to demons, which in turn probably going to kill you. So, insanity is the other huge part for this game. The more insanity your character gets, the more restricted they become, and they kind of start to go crazy. And that makes it so you feel almost trapped within the abilities that you have, and it's really hard to take actions and do things. So you try to, it's almost like a mindful hit points. So you have your basic hit points, and the weaker you become, when you get down to 0 hit points, you're dead. Insanity kind of builds up, and once it reaches that point, there's almost no return. Your character goes mad, and you can gain all sorts of weird quirks to roleplay. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of fun. But that's the basics of the system. The setting is the idea that there's this huge entity that lives out in the void of the galaxy or the space, whatever you want to call it, and it goes around and it'll tear apart and corrupt the people in these worlds to the point where they begin tearing apart the fabric of reality between their world and this demon lord. And once that happens, he kind of comes out and he consumes the world and everything within it, and then he moves on. For this setting, I believe the world is called Earth, something like that. I'd have to double check. But for the world of this one, they're right on the verge of where the shadow, or this demon lord, has become a part of the world, and a lot of crazy shit has happened. Then orcs, which is normally a slave race, have rebelled, and then once a former orc slave has gained the throne of the empire, and he's, not a nice guy. There's areas, vampires and the undead return, and demons are starting to tear through the fabric of reality. The demon lord has corrupted people to the point that they are building cults and religious temples in honor of him, and they want to bring him through as some sort of mass religious sacrificing themselves to him so that he will consume them and the world. So all this shit is going down in this world, and the demon lord's just, waiting for his moment to break free and consume this world. What heroes are there are, trying to stop what they can, but it's already on the downhill slide. So it's almost like a survival horror game mixed with a high fantasy D&D-ish sort of game, mixed with a Call of Cthulhu and Insanity. There's a lot of different things at work. It seems a little overwhelming at first, maybe, but it's definitely not. The book goes through great detail on targeting different areas to play out, and different areas where a campaign can be set. It only goes up through level 10 at the moment. Apparently there's going to be rules in the future for higher levels. But once the characters get to level 10, if they can even, make it to that point, that's a great stopping point. They almost kind of encompasses one whole storyline. So there's clockworks. The setting is, like I said, very high fantasy, but they do touch on, like, the steam era and steampunk, sort of, or I guess not so much steampunk as it would be like the revolution type era, where they have big, huge clockwork machines. There are guns in it, just simple like flintlock and little pistols. These clockwork or automaton machines, you can be a clockwork character. And it's, they've just started breaking through into like the locomotive sort of level of engineering. They have blimps, and so it's not like highly technological, but they're just starting to break through into that feeling of a setting. There's some major cities that are, really focused on pushing the technology, and they might shun all the magics, and they're all about the scientifics and the engineering. Other areas are just still in the old school, and they have their witches and their shamans and their wizards. And depending on where the DM wants to build the campaign or place it, you have a lot of different options there. Let's see what else is in here. Typical equipment for, they got swords and armors. For spells, there's all different, let's see, somewhere in here. They're, instead of having domains and schools of magic, there's called traditions. There's an intellect traditions, and there's will traditions, depending on if you're a mage or you're a priest and what kind of path you go. They cover things like arcana, battle, conjuration, forbidden, necromancy, shadow, technomancy. And the will covers your basic domains: earth, air, wind, fire, nature, song, transformation, alteration, chaos. So it has a similar feel to that. To a lot of other systems that are out there. The spells are pretty simplistic as far as running. They there's one in here under the air tradition, you can stir the air, which is a sphere in a 2-yard radius centered at a point upon you that you can reach. And it causes just a soft breeze to kind of blow around in the area, but anything that's thrown at you or weapons that are fired at you get 1 bane to their attack roll from this wind that's encircling you. There's flight and alteration. You can do comprehension. You can do spider climb as a typical one. Underwater adaptation. Interestingly, there's things like your curse, your forbidden, and your necromancy all fall under traditions that are dark magic. And when you mess with these kind of spells, it can really twist your mind, and it can cause insanity. It can cause corruption. And they're also really twisted spells. Like, let me find one here for forbidden. All right, so forbidden. It's basically a level 1 spell. It's not called a level 1, but it's called Hateful Defecation. 1 living creature with a physical body within medium range is your target. The target's guts twist and rumble noisily. If the target's health is 10 or less, it dies instantly. Streams of blood and feces gushing from all of its orifices. If its health is higher than 10, it makes an intellect roll against the target's strength. So, and then it would deal 1d6 plus 2 damage that it would take otherwise. But I mean, blood and shit pouring from all your orifices. That's pretty badass, right? And they even have a really good little picture of it here if you want to look at it. Pretty good. And it has some really twisted spells in here, magics. You can do things with rituals and the Shadow of the Demon Lord. The whole, is the title of the book, but it's the idea that the demons, this fabric between the world and the void that this demon lord is in, his shadow kind of passes through and it corrupts things. It might pass by an area and it could cause things like the sun to black out, which causes weird mutations or horror effects that goes on. It can cause people to turn into werewolves. It can cause pandemics, infestation of things like maggots and locusts. It can turn the whole area into just a completely blasted wasteland, something akin to like Dark Sun. Or it could go the opposite and create just nothing but a frozen tundra of death. They can cause magic to go haywire. And these are things, when setting up an adventure or planning out an adventure, since we're doing a lot of one-shots, I will roll up to see what kind of effect the shadow has given the area, and then try to build a little adventure around that. Let's see, what else is there? He's came out with a few different adventures you can get over on like RPG Now or Drive-Thru RPG. He's, I believe, the creator there, Robert J. Schwalb. He has an expansion that just recently came out. There's one that targets how to be a vampire character, and I believe starters are in there. There's one for halflings. There's a little bestiary in this book, and it covers all your things, your demons and your constructs. What is that? A burrowing centipede, minotaurs, beastmen, which is your werewolves. There's some other more strange ones, like your gorgons. There's a ghastly chorus, which is where some sort of mage or somebody was able to tear the faces off of a group of people, and they stitch them all together, and it's sort of like a carpet of faces or a blob of faces that moan and cause you to go insane when you hear them and see them. There's your typical undeads, like goblins, or ghouls and zombies. There's the Dread Mother, which is sort of like this little fairy creature. She flies around and she can impregnate people with maggots that can eventually swarm out of them. There's hags. And let's see. I guess one last thing that I'll touch on is something like initiative. There isn't any actual initiative for this game. There is what's called a fast move and a slow move, and then there's the end of the round. Characters who want to do like one action, take a fast move. They might attack, they might cast a spell, they might drink a potion, they could move, something of that sort. They only get one action. Then people who go slow can take, generally, like, they would be able to move and take an action. So they could move and cast a spell, move and attack, something of that sort. And then get the end of the round where everything kind of, anything that's left over needs to be done. Every player also has triggers, which is, for example, when you're in melee combat with something, if they move away, they trigger an attack from you. It's not an attack of opportunity because I guess it could be called that, but it doesn't work the same way because that's the only time they would trigger that. But somebody might set up a trigger where when they see somebody pop over a wall to fire at them, they let loose their arrow, and that would go off on the trigger. There's a lot of abilities and class ideas that are built around triggers. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but one of them might have a trigger to be able to do something as their trigger action. Like a mage might be able to cast a spell as a trigger. It's just an extra way to give them some oomph in battle. So, when a combat starts up, you just ask the players, do you want to go fast or do you want to go slow? And the ones who want to go fast, they'll take their actions. And then the fast monsters would go. And then the people who want to go slow take their actions. And then the slow monsters go. And then you're at the end of the round, and it refreshes to the next round. The game does have some rules and ideas on if you want to play on a grid-based campaign, battle and have miniatures and stuff. But it seems to kind of fluff over that. It's much more a theater of the mind and just to draw a simple map to show where people are. Otherwise, you can do it a lot like D&D 5th edition, where you can play with miniatures and maps, but theater of the mind is what they're focusing on, and that's what this game does as well. So I'm going to do some more videos in the future about how to do different things in the game, but that's just your basic overview. I'm already at 26 minutes here, so I don't want to make you guys wait around any longer. But Shadow of the Demon Lord, you guys definitely need to check this out. It's a great game. He's coming out with new books constantly, adventures. And if you're into anything sort of fantasy, as well as Call of Cthulhu-esque, as well as anything just kind of crazy, this game really does cover it well. So yeah, that's it.